Cutdown day is 1 week from today. Who's on track to make the 53-man Jets roster? Let's do a roster projection today on Locked On Jets.
You are Locked On Jets, your daily New York Jets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome. This is the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It is Tuesday, August 20th, 2024, and I'm your host, John B. from GanggreenNation.com. Thank you so much for making the show your first listen or first watch every day. Subscribe to the show for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts so you get new episodes as soon as they're posted. If you enjoy the show and are listening on a podcast source, please give it a 5-star review. And if you're watching on YouTube and enjoy the show, give this episode a big thumbs up. It helps us out, helps other Jets fans find the podcast. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. Well, Cutdown Day is just 1 week away. Tuesday, August 27th at 4 p.m. Teams need to cut their rosters from 90 players down to 53. And over the next 2 days, we're going to project where the 53-man Jets roster stands at the moment. Today, we're going to focus on the offense. Tomorrow, we will do the defense. Of course, there is still one final preseason game for players to make their case, but we're going to figure out where things stand today. And this is going to be a combination of where I think the Jets will, what I think the Jets will do, what common sense will dictate, and probably a little bit of what I hope they'll do. We're going to combine these things and try and figure out where things currently stand with the Jets roster. I hope you liked the headline on today's show. Obviously, it's a joke. I'm just waiting, though. There's always one person who sends this angry email who doesn't get that it's a joke. So just to be clear, if you have an email written in draft form about the headline, it's a joke. But let's begin at the quarterback position. And I think the Jets are going to keep 3 quarterbacks. And maybe I'm wrong on this. They did not keep 3 out of training camp last year, but I think there's a lot of logic to keeping 3 quarterbacks. Now, obviously, Aaron Rodgers, as our headline shows, is going to make the team. Tyrod Taylor is another lock. He will be the backup quarterback. I think, heading into the offseason, the biggest lock in the NFL was that the Jets were going to bring in a backup quarterback with a lot of experience after what happened last year with Zach Wilson. So the 2 guys who are locks are Aaron Rodgers and Tyrod Taylor. And it's conceivable the Jets could keep just 2 quarterbacks. That's actually what they did leaving training camp last year, but I think they will keep 3. And I just think there's a logic to keeping 3 because last year the NFL changed its rules for active players. On game day, all 53 of your players are not active. You have to deactivate 5 players. And last year they changed the rule, and it goes back to the NFC Championship game from 2 years ago when the 49ers, both of their quarterbacks got injured. They did not have a third quarterback who could go into the game. So the NFL changed its rule. And essentially now you can designate a quarterback as your emergency quarterback, and he does not count against your 48 active players. So essentially it's a free guy. It's a free guy who's active on game day. Essentially he's a 49th guy because he doesn't count against your 48 active players. He's a guy who can only come in the game if your top 2 quarterbacks get injured. But if your top 2 quarterbacks get injured, it keeps your team afloat at least. I mean, I know most third-string quarterbacks are not very good, but you can at least run a shell of your offense with a third-string quarterback in there. You cannot run a shell of your offense if you have to move a running back or a wide receiver to quarterback. I think Garrett Wilson would be the Jets' emergency quarterback in that situation because he played quarterback in high school, but you don't want to be in that situation. You don't want to be in a situation where you have a non-quarterback playing quarterback. You at least want a guy who's used to taking snaps, who's used to throwing the ball. So my guess is that it's going to be of the two guys the Jets have. I would go with Adrian Martinez just because I think he's played at a higher level in the preseason so far. I think he brings a different element as well, opposed to Andrew Peasley, because Martinez is a guy who makes plays with his legs. And when you're talking about a third string quarterback in the lineup, you're not going to run a very sophisticated passing game. Now you'll run a more sophisticated passing game than you would if you had a wide receiver playing quarterback. But I think when you get down to your third quarterback, it's better if it's a guy who can make plays with his legs. It's better if a guy you can build in some designed runs for, because you're not going to be dealing with a guy who can get to his second and third reads all that frequently. So to manufacture offense, you need somebody who can make plays with his legs. So I go with Martinez. I think the Jets, common sense would, my three pieces of criteria are what I think the Jets will do knowing them, what common sense would dictate, and what I would do. And the common sense dictate and what I would do would suggest that you keep a third quarterback. And I think it would be Martinez, again, because of his ability to make plays with the leg. So I think Jets keep three quarterbacks. That's my guess right now. At running back, this might seem a little light, but I think they're only going to keep three: Breece Hall, Braylon Allen, Isaiah Davis. And those are the three locks at the running back position. I don't think they keep Izzy Abanikanda. And I think there are a couple elements to this. First of all, I think on some level, they can say whatever they want. I don't think they went into the draft saying we need to draft an Izzy Abanikanda replacement. I don't think they went into the draft saying we are completely dissatisfied with Izzy. But I think when you draft two running backs, it's a sign that you aren't all that thrilled with your incumbent number two guy. Jets were thrilled with Breece Hall. Entering the draft, Izzy Abanikanda was their number two guy. I don't think you would have drafted two running backs if you thought Izzy Abanikanda had a lot of potential. Again, I'm not saying that they went into the draft and their goal was to get rid of Izzy Abanikanda, but the fact that this came up, the fact that they had two running backs in front of them and they decided to take two players at what in many ways is the lowest value position on the field, that's a sign that they don't love Izzy Abanikanda. Can Izzy help on special teams? I don't really know that that's the case, and that would be the case for keeping him as the fourth running back. So I think they only keep three. And now Nick Bawden's gone. Last year they would have kept Nick Bawden as the fullback. We'll get to who's going to fill the Bawden role in a little bit, but I think they'll only keep three because there really aren't that many carries to go around. I think Izzy Abanikanda is a guy who the Jets would have a very good chance of stashing on the practice squad. Maybe some other team picks him up, but these running backs who have speed and or late round picks, have that sort of pedigree. They're kind of a dime a dozen in this league. And even if you let Izzy go, again, there are lots of running backs. I mean, every year you see some team plug in a guy that they just got off the waiver wire, and you get to November and December, and defenses are kind of beat up, and you just get a running back with some fresh legs in there. And sometimes that makes a difference. So even if the Jets lose Izzy Abanikanda, there's got to be some other running back out there. And I don't know that they need another running back because I like what they've got right now. I think, Breece Hall, I mean, it's difficult to argue Breece Hall's anything other than an excellent back. Braylon Allen's been turning heads, since he set foot on the practice field. And Isaiah Davis has got some potential. He was a guy who dominated the lower level, forced a lot of missed tackles. And, he was one of my winners that I mentioned on yesterday's show, recapping the preseason game against the Carolina Panthers. So, three might be a little bit light, certainly lighter than what the Jets have done in recent memory. And part of that's, they're not going to, Nick Bawden is now gone. And it's very rare that you see a team keep a fullback who only plays the fullback role. Now, teams have plays where they have a fullback role in them. It's very rare in this day and age, unless you're like San Francisco or Baltimore, an offense that likes to use very heavy sets. Very rare in this day and age to see a team keep a guy who only plays fullback. Most guys need a little bit more versatility, and the Jets do have a guy who has a little bit more versatility. We'll get to that. Continuing here on this Tuesday edition of Locked On Jets, we're going to turn our attention to the pass catchers. Who are the Jets going to keep at wide receiver and tight end? Again, versatility is going to play a role, but so I think the third phase of the game will also, when we talked about the last couple of guys the Jets keep, special teams matter for the Jets when they keep their roster, and I think it will play a role as they pick their 53 next week. And we'll talk in more detail on that, continuing here on this Tuesday edition of Locked On Jets. Today's episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by FanDuel. You've heard me talk a lot about FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Well, now I have something a little different for you. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Then with a YouTube TV base plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out-of-market game. All you need is a Google account and a current form of payment, and you can cancel anytime. And if you're a Jets fan who lives out of market, Sunday Ticket is an absolute must. It's the only way you can see out-of-market games that aren't on national TV. I know the Jets play a lot of nationally televised games this season, but not all of them are. But it's also great even if you're a Jets fan living in the New York area, because you get to see all the games. If there's a time slot where the Jets aren't on and the game you want is not on in the New York area, YouTube TV is the place to go. Again, FanDuel is the place to get in on the action. You can bet on the Jets, over-unders. You can bet on them week 1 against the San Francisco 49ers, where they are road underdogs. You can bet on any NFL game and then watch it on YouTube TV with your free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to download America's #1 sportsbook. Thank you so much for making Locked On Jets your first listener, first watch every day. And a big shout out to you, everydayers. This is a daily podcast covering the New York Jets with new episodes each day through the week, Monday through Friday. We are projecting the Jets' 53-man roster on offense today. We've talked about the backfield. Now let's move on to the pass catchers. We're going to talk in this segment about the wide receiver and tight end positions. Now, my projection, I got the Jets keeping 6 wide receivers. Garrett Wilson, Mike Williams, Allen Lazard, Xavier Gipson, Malachi Corley, and Irv Charles. And I think it's fair to say that the first 5 of those are locks. Garrett Wilson is the #1 receiver. It doesn't take a lot to understand that Garrett Wilson's going to be on the team. Ditto Mike Williams. Mike Williams is the #2 receiver. Jets feel like he's on path to start week 1. He's recovering from that knee injury he suffered last year. Mike Williams is going to be on the team. Allen Lazard, this is one people aren't going to love to hear, but Allen Lazard's going to be on the team, and I still think Allen Lazard's going to have a role on this team. Now, fortunately, it's not going to be as big of a role as it was last year when he entered the season as the #2 receiver, and what was a folly. I mean, it was just a really, really bad decision going into the year with Lazard as the #2 receiver. Lazard's going to fight for targets with some of the other guys, with Gipson, with Corley. He bumped down the depth chart, of course, but Aaron Rodgers likes him. And look, I think if the Jets could find some team to give them a draft pick to take that contract off their hands, they would. The problem right now with the Lazard contract is it's just a bad contract. So I think the Jets might have to give up. The Jets actually might have to give up something to get Lazard off the books, and it's just not worth it because they can cut him after this season. His contract becomes cuttable after this year. So why would you give up a draft pick when you're already short on draft picks to get rid of a guy you can get rid of after the season? Hopefully Lazard plays better. He can't really play much worse than he did last year, but I think it's very, unless they find somebody to take him off his hands, he's going to be on the team. Malachi Corley, 3rd-round pick, not much to speculate about there. He's a lock. The question for him is, how much can he produce? I'm sure we'll talk about that as we head into the regular season. And my expectations for Corley have been pretty low. I mean, I think that they'll manufacture touches for him. I'll say this: through the first 2 weeks of the preseason, I haven't seen anything that would change my expectation to kind of pump the brakes on pump the brakes on what I'm expecting from Corley. I think look, he's a rookie; he's still learning. It's going to be a process. I would not expect too much from him this year, but certainly the Jets will have him on the roster, and the Jets will hope to generate some offense from him by undesigned touches. We're figuring out ways to get him the ball in space. Xavier Gipson, if we're going to be honest, had that magical moment in the incredible week 1 win over the Buffalo Bills a year ago. After that, not a whole lot. Wasn't particularly productive as a returner after that punt return to win the game against the Bills in overtime week 1. The Jets gave him a ton of reps as a slot receiver. And, it got to Gipson essentially replaced Randall Cobb early last season as the slot receiver after the Jets figured out the Cobb idea was a bad one. Did not produce a whole lot. And I think that, the way the Jets managed this last year, the idea was that they knew they were not going to get a lot from Gipson. I think the hope was that, these active game reps would benefit him going forward. They would help him develop. There was some buzz about him during the offseason program about his improved route running. We haven't gotten to see him because of he's been dealing with an injury. We'll see. Keep an open mind on Gipson. I don't know what to expect from him, but it certainly seems like the Jets coaching staff's a fan. So I would expect Gipson to be there. The 6th guy is the question. And I think it's going to be Irv Charles because, going back to what I think the Jets will do, that element of our criteria, the Jets really do focus on special teams, especially these last couple roster spots. So, I know Jason Brownlee could be a guy in the mix, but I would expect Brownlee to end up on the practice squad. And I don't think the Jets would have a lot of issues getting Brownlee to the practice squad. I don't know that, they got him to the practice squad last year. So I don't know that it's necessarily a situation where the Jets should be overly worried about losing Jason Brownlee. And even if they do, I don't know how good Jason Brownlee is really going to be. I think the Jets will focus on special teams. They do it a lot with a lot of these moves. In fact, that's one of the reasons Charles was on the team last year. It's not like Irv Charles has a tremendous amount of upside as a wide receiver. So I think the Jets will keep him. They could, it's conceivable you keep 5 receivers, but I'm guessing the Jets keep the light backfield, which opens up that 6th receiver spot for them to keep. If you only keep 3 running backs, it's easier to keep 6 receivers. And I think Irv Charles gives you value. Normally, how much value does your number 6 receiver usually give you? 0, because he doesn't play it. He never plays a wide receiver. So if you have a guy who actually is a good special teamer, good in punt coverage units, and the Jets lost Justin Hardy this offseason, I would expect Irv Charles. My guess is that Irv Charles makes the team. At tight end, I think the Jets keep 4. And that's you could keep 3. I think the Jets will keep 4, though. Tyler Conklin and Jeremy Ruckert are the two locks. Not much question there. Conklin's the starter. Ruckert entering a really big year for him because, while Ruckert gets a lot of love from the fan base and the media, he has not produced a whole lot in his time with the Jets and struggled to even beat out CJ Uzomah for the role as number 2 tight end. So this is a big year for Ruckert. I think it's a do or die year for Ruckert. But he will enter the season as the number 2 tight end, another guy who's recovering from an injury. So who did the Jets keep? I think they will keep Kenny Yeboah. I've mentioned this. Yeboah spent much of last season injured, but when he did come back late in the season, a lot of work on special teams, and that's one of the things that allows you to keep an extra tight end. We talk about what positions are the Jets keeping more than they need to. Tight end could be one because they have a guy in Yeboah who I think Brant Boyer likes. Now, how good is Yeboah at special teams? I'm not entirely sure. Difficult to judge, but I think Brant Boyer really likes him. He played on a bunch of the units last year once he returned. So Yeboah, and the other aspect of this is I think they will keep Anthony Firkser. Firkser was a guy they signed just a couple weeks ago, and they cut Nick Bawden. We talked earlier about how it's difficult to justify keeping a guy who only plays fullback in today's NFL. Firkser is a tight end who has a lot of experience at fullback and has been productive. He's been a good pass catcher, which Bawden does not really give you a lot of pass catching. Firkser does. Firkser's put up some decent numbers as a receiver, both at tight end and fullback. So I think there are 2 elements here that allow you to keep a 4th tight end. One is that you have a guy in Yeboah who plays a lot of special teams. The other is that you have a guy in Firkser who gives you more versatility. He can play tight end and he can play fullback. And again, I think he adds an element that Bawden did not because of his ability, to catch the football. So I think the Jets will keep 4 at the tight end position, 6 at the wide receiver position, and I think there will be a focus on special teams and a focus on versatility when they make these decisions for these roles. Now, here on the Locked On Jets podcast, there's only one spot to focus on the offense, and that's a very important one: offensive line. And we know from the last couple of years, with all the injuries the Jets have had, depth is really important. I think that will weigh on the Jets' minds when they decide how many offensive linemen to keep. I'll take the over, and I'll talk about the guys I think who will make it and why they'll make it as we continue here on this Tuesday edition of Locked On Jets. This is the Locked On Jets podcast. On this Tuesday, we are doing a Jets 53-man roster projection over the next 2 days. Tomorrow, we will focus on the defense. Today, we are focused on the offense. There's only one preseason game left, so these projections could change. If somebody has a big preseason finale against the New York Giants this weekend, perhaps somebody could play themselves onto the team. If somebody really struggles, perhaps they play themselves off the team. But this is my best guess right now, and the criteria I'm using. Number one, what I think the Jets will do based on years of watching this regime at work, what common sense would dictate, and also maybe a little bit of what I'm hoping they will do. So we focused everywhere on the offense except the offensive line. And that's pretty important because if you watch the Jets the last couple of years, you've seen the offense really struggle. And of course, a lot of the offensive struggles need to be laid at the feet of Zach Wilson. But another issue with the Jets is that they just have not been able to control the point of attack. And one of the reasons they have not been able to control the point of attack is the offensive line struggled. And the offensive line struggled because of injuries. And I think that this will weigh heavily on the New York Jets as they decide which players they keep on their roster. And I have the Jets keeping 9 offensive linemen, which is a rather large group to keep. But I think just all the injuries that they've suffered over the last few years will make them more inclined to just keep an extra lineman or two because they've seen, and you're hoping that they stay healthier this year. I mean, we've talked a lot about the age and some of the injury histories that these guys have on the offensive line. I guess the one thing that's good for the Jets is they've been so injury prone the last couple of years that a regression to the mean still means you could have a healthier offensive line. So your starting 5 is obvious. Tyron Smith, John Simpson, Joe Tippmann, Elijah Vera Tucker, Morgan Moses. That's a pretty obvious one. They also just drafted Olu Fashanu, 11th overall. So, he's going to be on the team. So you have 6. Those are your 6. I think Wes Schweitzer makes it because he's the most obvious choice as a backup interior offensive lineman. You have to have somebody who can play guard and center in case there's an injury. Schweitzer is that guy. There's really nobody who could beat him out. The Jets brought him in. He's got experience with the Jets. He's got experience in this system. And he's actually been a decent backup. He's played at a level of a decent backup through much of his career. So I think Schweitzer is going to be the guy who's the top backup on the interior. And Fashanu is going to be the top backup at both left tackle and right tackle. And the objective, I think, will be for Fashanu to take over for Tyron Smith as the starting left tackle in 2025. So that leaves me with 2 slots. One of them, I think, will be Carter Warren. They drafted him last year, a day 3 pick, but I think the Jets liked him. He got some playing experience last year, especially late in the season because of injuries. It was not great, but he did hold up pretty well when the Jets played some weaker opponents, particularly the Washington Commanders. I don't know how good Warren's going to be, but I will say this. Washington had one of the worst groups of pass rushers in the NFL last year. And the fact Warren shut them down, that says something. It shows he's at least a cut above guys who can't play. If Warren had battled them to a draw, that would have been a really bad sign. The fact he actually held up okay against a team that can't rush the passer, that says something. And I think that he's got the physical tools to conceivably develop into a decent backup. Will he get there? It's tough to say, but I think that as a developmental lineman, and that's when you're talking about like your 8th or 9th lineman, you're probably dealing with more developmental guys. Warren is a guy who's logical. The 9th guy I think the Jets will keep, and I don't love this. I think it'll be Max Mitchell, a guy who was a 4th round pick 2 years ago, who was pressed into quite a bit of action as a rookie when he really was not ready physically. I mean, he was kind of in over his head, then dealt with a health issue at the end of his rookie season. The fact he was able to resume his career was a positive. I don't know that Max Mitchell has the physical tools to succeed as a NFL tackle, but I think the Jets like him a little bit more than I do. And the other thing was they slid Mitchell inside the guard a little bit last year. Now, I don't know that Mitchell has the physical tools to play guard either because I don't think he's overly strong. But, when you're talking about backup offensive linemen, you want to have versatility. I don't know that I would say Mitchell could necessarily play either guard or tackle effectively, but I don't know that my viewpoint, this is what I think the Jets will do, because I think the Jets like Mitchell a little bit more than I do. And I think that, they would be inclined to keep him. I think that, if it comes down to Mitchell versus somebody else, they probably would lean Mitchell. I think part of this is they drafted him a couple of years ago, so they saw something. I think he would be the 9th lineman. I think he's behind Warren on the depth chart and also behind Fashanu when we're talking about tackle. So he's your number 5 tackle. He's probably your number 4. He's probably the second backup on the interior behind Schweitzer. Schweitzer would be the first guard to come in. Mitchell, I'm not even sure. Maybe they would even move Warren to guard before they put Mitchell in. I think Mitchell would be at the very back of the roster. When we're talking about offensive linemen, I think I don't know that the Jets would want to put him on the field, but I think the Jets do view Mitchell as a cut above anything else they could have as their number 9 offensive lineman. And my guess is that because of all the injuries, they would be inclined to keeping a 9th offensive lineman. That's all for today's episode. This has been the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day is our motto. As always, if you enjoyed the show, hit the subscribe button where you're watching or listening so that you'll never miss an episode. If you're watching on YouTube and enjoy the show, give this episode a big thumbs up. Helps us out, helps other Jets fans find the podcast. Enjoy your Tuesday, everybody. Tomorrow we will continue our 53-man roster projection with the defense.